Hi everyone, I hope you're all having a great week. It feels so good to be in nature, and it also feels really good to be in my studio, so let's get going. Contrary to my usual way of doing things, this week I have a plan. Well, sort of a plan. I've picked out my color palette, and I'll be working with 3 main colors, along with, of course, a couple of iridescent paints that I really love. And what I am doing right now is creating a sort of grid in which I will paint some swatches, I guess. Well, not really swatches. I'm going to be painting these little rectangles, square shapes, whatever you want to call them, in this grid. It's not a uniform grid. It's a little bit irregular, but I am using a ruler to create it. I don't want to have all of my shapes the exact same size, and I have left some space in between the shapes so that I can paint inside the shapes. And I want to use this grid as a chance to slow things down and practice some brush strokes that are more detailed. And so it's hard to draw a really straight line unless you're actually moving pretty slowly. Maybe for some people it's easy to do it when they're doing it quickly, especially if they've been doing it for a long time. But for me, I tend to be a little bit more less controlled, I think, when I'm painting. I tend to just kind of throw paint on the paper and love to watch the effects that are created when I'm adding water. But I also like to be able to create a variety of different effects, and some of these effects can be created only if you try to, I guess, somewhat control what you're doing. And so I'm applying the paint in different ways in each of the squares. Sometimes I'll be adding a little bit of salt to the squares or the rectangles. And I'm gonna be putting in all of the different colors that I'm working with. So I'll be working with Carmine Nacre, Phthalo Turquoise, and I'm also going to be working with Quinacridone Deep Gold. And then I'll also mix these colors together to create different shades of oranges and greens and purples, and I think it'll all go together. But again, this is mainly about me practicing different ways of applying paint. As you can see right now, for instance, I applied my paint in a less diluted form on the left of that rectangle, and then I came in with just a damp brush, and I'm taking the paint that was already on the paper and I'm moving it to the right. So it's a, I guess, a fun way for me to practice things that I don't practice a whole lot. I just kind of, like I said, I tend to paint intuitively, and I throw paint on the paper and, love to work with whatever it is that comes my way. But it's also fun to see what kind of different effects you can create by using different watercoloring techniques. When I'm moving my paintbrush off the screen, I'm usually doing one of two things. Usually I'm wiping the excess paint from my bristles on a piece of paper towel, or I'm getting water. It's the two actually usually go hand in hand, especially when I'm trying to create an effect like this one where the paint is stronger in the center and a little bit more light around the edges of that rectangle. It would probably also be really neat in a little project like this one to come in and add the different colors that I'm working with to each of the individual rectangles or squares that I'm painting. But for this project, I decided that I wanted to keep it one color in each of the rectangle slash squarish shapes. I don't think any of those shapes are actually truly squares, because a real square would actually have equal length sizes, and I did not measure any of this. I just kind of eyeballed everything that I created in my grid. So once again, I'm using one color in each individual shape, and I'm just going to be applying the paint in different ways in each of those shapes to try and create a few different effects. And this is my way of having a little creative practice to practice some of my watercoloring skills. And once I'm done putting my colors in the entire grid, I'm going to come back in with my pens and I'm going to do some very simple line work. And this will be, again, another chance for me to practice and maybe experiment with creating different designs in each of those shapes that I'm painting right now. It is a good idea to make time to practice certain skills. Even though I do paint very intuitively and I love to just kind of throw paint on paper and, sort of let the paper and the paint kind of interact and do their thing, it's also good for me to practice more precise painting skills, I guess, or precision painting skills, because on different occasions, I do want to add certain details in my paintings. And if I never practice more delicate brush strokes, then it becomes even more of a challenge for me to do those brush strokes. So here I'm working with not my smallest brush. I think this is a number 4, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm trying to go in and make those lines between my shapes as straight as possible, but I'm not stressing too much about making them completely straight. I just want to slow my brush strokes down and practice drawing these rectangular shapes. And I don't usually, that's another thing I don't usually do. I don't often work with square shapes. I have a tendency to prefer circles. And so this is really me challenging myself to do something completely different than what I normally do. And it's good to do that because it helps us sharpen our skills and think outside the box. And oftentimes we make discoveries along the way of things that we would like to repeat in future paint projects. here I've mixed a tiny bit of my phthalo turquoise along with the quinacridone deep gold. Again, just a tiny amount of each color with lots and lots of water. And I've created this very light wash of a color that is now tending more towards of a green because of the golden tones in the quinacridone deep gold mixed with the turquoise. It's actually quite a beautiful color, and I'm gonna do this with each of the colors, the main colors that I'm working with. I'm gonna mix them to create these light washes of different colors, and I think it's gonna go really well in the grid because all of the colors are in the same scheme. I'll be mixing the carmine nacre with the phthalo turquoise, and that'll create a nice purple. And because the carmine nacre and the turquoise are already in the painting, that purple goes well in this painting because all the colors are congruent, I guess is the word I'm looking for. So it's a neat little thing to practice, to create these different colors, to see what colors go well together, and to create a painting using only these three colors. Now, eventually I will come back in with some star gold, of course. This is me. And I'm also going to add my tropical sunrise magic green, because I want to go into each of these different shapes, and I want to practice creating different marks. But for now, I'm really enjoying creating this grid, and it's kind of one of those funny things, actually. When I was finished creating this grid, I liked it so much, I almost, was feeling a bit scared of going in and adding more details because I didn't want to change it too much. But at the same time, the reason I wanted to create this grid and to do this work was so that I could practice blending colors, that I could practice different watercolor techniques, and I also wanted to practice my mark making. So I am gonna push beyond my perceived limit, and I'm gonna go in and create those marks, even though I do really like the grill, and maybe especially because I like the grid. I think it's gonna look cool when I'm done. So here, this color that I'm adding right now that almost looks like a salmon color is simply a mix of a tiny bit of carmine nacre along with the quinacridone deep gold. And so I added a few squares of that, and then I felt like I needed to add just one light wash square of the carmine nacre, because it's, in most cases in the painting, it's been applied in a pretty intense form, I guess, not very diluted, and so I wanted to have one square where that color was also represented, but in its more diluted form. My grid is now completely dry, and I am feeling a little daunted to start adding some details. So the first thing I'm going to do is go with what my gut was telling me to do, and that's just to create some very simple vertical lines in between each of the shapes. And I'm going to create them horizontally, like I am doing right now, like the vertical lines on the horizontal plane. And then I'm going to flip my paper around, and I'm going to create some more vertical lines on the vertical plane. You'll see what I mean. When I'm starting to feel doubt in my mind as to what I need to do next, I remember to leave my mind aside and to just check in with what my intuition is telling me to do. And my intuition was telling me to start adding some tropical sunrise magic green, and so that's what I'm doing. And I'm always going to work on building my details in that way. I'm going to let my intuition guide me as to what it is I want to do next. So, another challenge I sort of gave myself for this painting process, because I was experimenting and playing and just trying to see what kind of different patterns and different designs I could create. I gave myself the challenge to work only with lines and dots. I do this a lot in a lot of my paintings. I use dots and lines in a variety of different ways, and sometimes the patterns are very repetitive. So, this is kind of my way of using maybe some more repetitive things, that repetitive lines, repetitive dots, in ways that I already know I love using them. But I also want to challenge myself to maybe use them in other ways that I don't typically use them in my paintings. And in doing so, I am probably going to discover new ways of working with simple little tools such as lines and dots. In a few of the shapes I've created, I wanted to have a center line of seemingly floating vertical lines, but I needed to have a guide in order to do that. So what I did is I used a ruler and a pencil to just draw in some lines on top and on the bottom. I went in with my pen, added the vertical lines in between those two pencil marks, and then once my ink had dried, I just came in with my eraser and I erased the pencil lines. comes Star Gold. Oh, I know a lot of you love Star Gold as much as I do, and I cannot help but giggle when I pull it out because I love it that much. Star Gold tends to go very well with a lot of the colors I love to work with, but I am noticing that when I paint Star Gold over this color in particular, Carmine Nacre, especially when it's in its less diluted form, when it's darker, I don't tend to like it as much. So, that's why I'm doing these little experiments so that I can figure out what the things I like look like and what the things I do not like also look like. So it's good to experiment like this because it really teaches us a lot about what we value in our creative process. In hindsight, I do think I would have preferred to create a square, a colored in square of the Tropical Sunrise Magic Green rather than doing what I'm doing right now. But again, this is all about learning, figuring things out as we go along. I do really love the Star Gold against the quinacridone Deep Gold, and I also really love it against the turquoise. And it doesn't matter if either of these colors are diluted or if they're at their strongest intensity. I do find that the Star Gold looks really good with these two colors. And now that I'm adding these dots of gold to this particular shape, I'm discovering that maybe it's not so much that I don't like the Star Gold on top of the Carmine Nacre when it's not diluted, but maybe it's that I don't like the gold on top of the Carmine Nacre that has had salt applied to it because it created that texture and it's sort of distracting the eye with the Star Gold, and I think that's what I don't like. I really quite like most of what I've done in each of these little shapes, and I can definitely see myself using some of those details in other paintings. The one shape I'm not too crazy about is the one on the bottom right corner, and in hindsight I kind of wish I had done what I did on the top the top left corner, which is just splatter some paint on top of that turquoise square. I think it would have looked much nicer. But what I do like is the combination of the turquoise, the magic green, and the gold along with some black. And I could see that being very pretty with other types of details, just not the details that I added here. After pulling off my tape, I decided that I needed to add a little bit more contrast in that square that I'm working on right now, because the square was very light in color and somehow it was not pleasing to the eye for me. So I decided to add a little bit of stippling in the middle, and I do feel that it makes that square look way better. So what did I learn in this process? Well, I definitely learned that I love this combination of colors, and I love how the colors mix together to create other shades. That I really love. I love a lot of the vertical lines that I created with my black pen, and also the dotting in different, using it in different ways definitely is something that I want to do more. I love most of the little shapes and I think the piece looks kind of neat as a whole. It was just kind of a little experimental piece meant really for practice, but all in all, it ended up being a joy to work on. In fact, it was 2.5 hours worth of filming. So it was a time for me to slow things down and experiment and make some discoveries that I can now bring into my next creative project. Do you give yourself time to play and experiment like this? Thank you again for making the time to join me on this creative journey. I hope this little project sparked some ideas and inspiration for your next creative project. I'm wishing you all a wonderful week and happy creating!